So I'm not quite as talented the others that can do lots of range and movement, but I want to start by just acknowledging all of the salmon warriors in here today. It's amazing to see the people that come together and the work that you do in the territories. I'd love to lock up the room and get you to solve our Lower Fraser challenges we have, but I know we don't have time for that. So yeah, I've been asked to speak about a vision for people working together. And it's been quite a journey, as Mike has mentioned. I've been with the organization since its inception. And it was really about leadership coming together and saying, we have a problem. We have a problem amongst each other. We're not working well together. 30 First Nations. And then there was the crash in 2009 with the sockeye that didn't return. There were supposed to be 10 million sockeye returning that year. We all expected a good food, social, and ceremonial fishery. We expected an economic fishery, make a little bit of money on it. Only 1.2 million fish returned. And so that was the genesis, and a few leaders came together and made it happen along with myself and others. So this is really about past, present, and future. And in amongst that, I'll give you a little bit of background about the organization and the nations. And we'll talk about perhaps a little bit of crisis and what's going on in the Lower Fraser around governance and management, as well as a vision for the future. And so just a quick little bit about our organization. There's 30 First Nations, as I mentioned. It's a span of the Fraser River that's from the estuary to Yale, BC. It's about 200 kilometers. And it's pretty diverse. It's got tidal waters, it's got a gravel reach, and it's got this amazing canyon. And all different kinds of fisheries occur there. So in the short time that we've been working amongst each other and with each other, we've got 24 First Nations that have signed on to a governance protocol, thanks to Brenda Gartner and her team for pulling together the necessary legal things that we need to do for that. And we've got 24 First Nations, started out with 18. You'll see about 6 in the black that are not associated or affiliated formally, but we still extend communications, technical support, and have an open door policy for when those nations want to come on board, or they may not. There's busy nations out there, and they're just doing a lot of good work in their territories, and so we support them when we can. This is just a quick org chart. You can see to the green, we have, I heard conservation economy seemed to be kind of a statement being made lately. And so our habitat, our biologist team has grown immensely. We've got 3 departments. Anything in a dotted line is very aspirational. This org chart is part of our 2023 to 2025, or 2022 to 2025 strat plan. So three short years, but the dotted lines that you see in this visual are aspirational, and we're trying to fill those positions. Some of them we've filled already. And in the orange, you'll see the administrative and financial regime that we've put together. And we haven't been able to keep up to the biologists. There's so many of them. There's like 14 or 15 techs and bios. And our admin team basically couldn't keep up. We were starting to fill positions and build that capacity. So if I go outside of the Alpha organization, if I started to explain or describe how things function outside of our organization to our leadership, this is probably how we try and design it and illustrate and describe it. It's complex, it's busy, and our nations are busy, our leaders are busy. And so if I think about the Integrated Fisheries Management Plan and how it's integrated with the Pacific Salmon Treaty, it's this kind of busy, it's this kind of complex. And so my job is to kind of bring resolution to our leadership and bring these infographics to them and say, no, it's not that complex. We can actually try and do this work amongst each other. And so you'll see in the light orange sphere is pretty much our First Nations caucus, the Lower Fraser First Nations, and our MOU partners. All up and down the Fraser watershed, we have found ways to work with organizations like ours and build MOUs, build relationships, so that we can have a table for leadership to have the challenging discussions and discussions for opportunity. And then, of course, the little darker shade of orange is the government to government with the province and feds. and stakeholders in academia, industry, and so on, and of course the international regime that I just mentioned with the Pacific Salmon Treaty. So it's kind of a snapshot to try and bring clarity to all of the complexity that we live in with fish. And so we do pride ourselves, as I mentioned, in terms of building those relationships in the Lower Fraser, and we have to be cognizant of wherever those fish migrate to, we got to have relationships, right from the headwaters to Alaska and back. Man, that's a lot of work, right? And collaboration takes time, it takes dedication, it takes resources. Who's going to fund all of that? Well, we all try and find a way, right? So in this photo, you'll see a picture of us with the Secwepemc Fisheries Commission in the bottom left, doing ceremony at one of our meetings and acknowledging an MOU. And then to the right, you've got the Lower Fraser Collaborative Table. We never thought we would be in the same venue, in the same place, with recreational and commercial fishers. What brought us together was crisis. We finally recognized this is not worth fighting over. It's not worth fighting over the last fish. We got to get into the same room and talk about how we're going to replenish, rebuild, and recover fish. And so it's about 4 years in the making. It's not perfect. We still have challenges, but they never leave the table. They'll come back, and we'll have the discussions. The top picture to the left is smiling James Mack and some of our leadership. We signed an MOU in June of 2024, just this year, and pretty proud of that work. But we still got a lot more to go. We want to get more ministries from the province involved, and we need DFO into an agreement with the nations as well. So I'm definitely into classic rock. Not so much a Supertramp fan. I like a few of their songs, but this album cover really resonated with me. I thought, man, we got a salmon crisis. Is everybody aware of it? Do they know that it's actually happening? Like they're disappearing on our time and place in this beautiful province. And so this guy's completely oblivious to what's going on around him, and we have to be careful. We need to bring the awareness and the education to people like that. So I talk about sockeye crisis, and I talked about the 1.2 million that we expected in 2009. I talked about that triggering our First Nations willing to get together, drop all of their political baggage at the door, and come and talk about fish in one venue. So that's good for nations, but then we still have to work with government and figure out a way forward as well. It also triggered the Cohen Inquiry, $30 million investment. I asked myself if those 75 recommendations and the $30 million was well spent. Was it good return on investment? I don't know. I would have rather spent it in the backyards or the territories of these nations up and down the Fraser watershed. So, worst return in record, 1.2 million. Fast forward to 2019, 470,000 escapement. Brutal. 2020, down to 288,000 sockeye in a place that used to have millions of sockeye returning every year. So we look at, they're not all bad years. So 2010, we probably had the best year that we've ever seen in the Fraser system with 28 million fish returning. And then, but you can see the cycle years and you can see the trend. It's not good. And if I was a betting person in 2026, probably 4 million, 2030, maybe 3 or 4. I hope I'm wrong. I absolutely hope I'm wrong, and I'm an optimist, by the way. And then there's acronyms. We live in this world of acronyms, so I created one. Where's the fish? But where's the subdominant cycle? Does anybody even know there's a subdominant cycle anymore? No, because everything in between these high dominant cycles is low returns now. So still staying on Supertramp, what's happening in our territory for nations? And this is really about identifying the crisis, and we are managing what's left with DFO, with the province, with all of you salmon warriors. And the major constraints that we see is resulting in a lack of food security for nations, limited ability to practice the fishery, so our cultural identity is disappearing like that. Inability to share the knowledge, and there's no way to make money on these fish anymore, right? There's just not enough fish. So when I'm talking to leadership, they're really reluctant to quantify the value of a fish. And I'm going, well, we really should, because everybody else does, and it's the only way to compete with everybody, right? But they say, no, no, no. So I used time as a metric to figure out a value, at least in my mind anyways. And in the 1990s, as a fisher, I was fishing 3 days a week, every week, all year, and it equates to 156 days. Amazing time, because you can pick and choose. You don't have to fish every day. You can balance it out over a period of, you might want to do summer holidays and take a weekend off, right? And if you fast forward 3 decades, 2021, 15 days in the river. 15 days. And if you do the math on that, from 3 short decades, I'm only fishing 10% of the time, using a time metric. So essentially, I've lost 90% of who I am in 3 decades, 30 years. What is there going to be for my grandchildren and other people not yet born? So I'm going to go through these maps fairly quickly, but some of the challenge is jurisdiction and the complexity that comes along with it. Same with authority. So this is just a map with the Lower Fraser from the mouth to the estuary to Yale, BC. It's about 200 kilometers. And these are the watersheds that are there, 5 watersheds that we have an inherent obligation to look after. These are the sub-watersheds. This is that fine little line between all the sub-watersheds called the US and Canadian border. And these are the small First Nation reserves that reside in what's left of Saltmuk. That's our territory. And this is the 4 geographical regions that our governance protocol has separated the river into. The various sub-fishery areas for the commercial sector, I think there's about 10 of them. And of course, DFO manages our fisheries, and they have another set of sub-areas, and it's about 10 or so. This is the recreational territories within our territory. There's about 10 sections of that. This is local jurisdictions, and I think, Fraser Valley, Metrovan, regional districts, municipalities, cities. And we throw it all together. This is the lovely mess we get to deal with. And so our job, our challenge is disentangling this and figuring out a way forward for the fish. So from my perspective, we do have a fish problem, but mostly we have a people problem, agency problem, authority problem. And so we have to find a way to disentangle this. So again, I try and bring these infographics and share them with our leadership in the best way that I can. And again, they're supposed to take the complexity out of it, but man, when you throw government and agencies together, it becomes quite a challenge. But this does bring a visual to the forefront. It's the same components as the orange diagram I showed you, but it identifies the 20 federal ministries that we have in Canada, and they have 208 departments. How the hell is a nation supposed to deal with that for fish and water? I have a problem, okay, I go to one of the ministries. Oh, go to this department, that department, and we'll see you in about 5 years, probably, right? Nations are no different. We got 200 First Nations in the province of BC, 4 or 5 political entities. And we're challenged too. We got to figure out our way forward. And 23 provincial ministries, maybe this has changed since the election, but they all also have lots of central agencies, crown corporations, and so on. Uh-oh, went the wrong way. So how do we move forward? And from a First Nation perspective, we have to find our way back to historical governance and management. And when I say that, we used to have a tribal entity called the Stalo Nation, 24 nations, but now they've split us all up. And within those Stalo, there's also 4 tribal governance areas historically. And we've all been related to resources, whether it's on the land or water. And that's how, if you look at the Chilliwack watershed, the Chilkoyak, the tribe, that's where they're from. So we want to get back to that kind of management. So I've heard transformative change, but we need radical change, and we need change now. These fish do not have the time, as we've seen from Jonathan and Anne early from their presentations. We got to move. And when we're talking about, this is a slide that just shows a little disparity. I got this from a DFO colleague, Bridget Payne. shared it with me a few years back. But anyways, it just shows the disparity between our nations and governing bodies like DFO and others in the ministry. And really, we're dealing with delegated authority most of the time. Resource managers, no disrespect to them at all, but that's where most of our nations spend their time, is working with resource managers versus folks like the Minister of Fisheries or the RDG, Regional Director General in the Pacific region. And at the end of the day, the First Nations are the ones that have the mandate, not organizations like ours. They can give us mandates to do specific work, but it's the rights-based interests that have all of the authority. First Nations Fisheries Council do an amazing job, but similar to our organization, they have to receive a mandate from First Nations directly. First Nations Leadership Council, Assembly of First Nations, same thing. I've often thought about how we do business with government in the world today, and I bought this cool carving from a Chilliwack artist who's amazing, by the way, and it made me think about it. It's got the two ravens or thunderbirds on the outside and the human in the middle, but it made me think about the difference between government and First Nations and how they operate. And on the government side, it's all top-down management, top-down governance. They have a mandate that they have to deliver within 4 years, and then they're on to another platform trying to get another election for the subsequent year. You've got Western science, and most political decisions, I would say, is driven by socioeconomics. Those gold mines scare the hell out of me, Jonathan, so hopefully you can stop that for me. And then on the First Nation sides, of course, grassroots. Our leaders spend a significant amount of time engaged with their community members trying to figure out, the mandate and the guidance that they need to advance the communities. Traditional knowledge, decisions on worldview, everything is connected. 7 generations. Man, that's a long time. How are we going to figure this out in 7 generations? But we're going to have to find a way forward. So the question is, how do we harmonize these two worlds? That's our challenge collectively, everybody in this room. Maybe it's UNDRIP. I think it's a good space and time to think about how that will play an important factor with DRIPA. And really, maybe government should consider devolution. Put the work out in the territories, in the nations, in the rivers, in the water where it belongs, right? And it'll take a little bit of a run at government. I won't criticize them too much because we've been getting some of this resourcing, and the picture to the side has been the way our staff members have been lately. It's been drinking from a fire hydrant, definitely, right? And that tap is going to get dried up. It'll dry up eventually. So we take it while we can, and we run around and do as much as we can as far as proposals. But in a short period, from 2017 to 2020, $2.8 billion invested in this area. There's probably more, but this is what I identified. And the PSSI, Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, amazing investment. But again, we have to ask ourselves how the government's being utilized this in terms of this funding and where it's actually getting to. Is it getting to the fish? Is it getting to the water where it matters most? And for me, in terms of radical change, as being the operational lead for the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, and other organizations like ours will probably agree that we need change. These RFP processes do nothing except make everything competitive, and then we end up in the same field, in the same territory, doing the same work. Not all the time, because we're starting to talk now. We're starting to collaborate, thanks to Anne and her presentation. And government silos. Man, if we could find a way to break those down a little bit and get to a place that we call that Samat, one heart, one mind, that would advance us that much further. So a few models before I wrap up here that we're thinking about in terms of nations building this in the Lower Fraser and then inviting government, inviting stakeholders to come and play in the same sandbox. So the Fraser Estuary Management Plan, Washington Watershed Resilient Action Plan, and Cowichan Watershed Board all have similarities in terms of having many jurisdictions, many governments, many stakeholders at the table. And so I will go through these fairly quickly. And FREMP was, I guess, abolished sometime in 2013. Didn't have the political support, didn't have the political resourcing to continue it. So if we were to redo this in the Lower Fraser, I would say we would say FREMP 2.0 on steroids. Let's do this in the Lower Fraser and have everybody involved. But why not do it for the whole Fraser watershed? Because we have to be mindful of where all these fish migrate to the headwaters and then back out to Alaska, right? I really like this model. We've been talking about it at the First Nations Caucus, and I'm very happy that the Salmon Foundation has been involved with this and brought it to the forefront. And again, it's got the feds, the states, the region, and where it matters the most, I will always say, is at the community scale. And the Cowichan Watershed Board, Tim and Tom and others, amazing work that you've done in that territory. We had the opportunity to go out there directly for a site visit with the Salmon Foundation last year, and really good work. Again, all sorts of jurisdictions involved, tons of work, and probably lots of resources to manage that, but very good work. So where do we go in terms of the path forward? The nations are really interested in government-to-government relationships, and understanding that we need a fourth G because the Pacific Salmon Treaty is at play with the transboundary considerations. And so we're going to build this out and figure out a way forward, not just for the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, but we have many or several First Nation organizations in the Lower Fraser, and we'll need their support. So this is our staff. We're growing, as I mentioned earlier. We have a staff of about a little over 20, and this is our executive committee group I believe we were in Swinomish in June doing our strat planning for the year. This is our house for now. It's a former band office in the community that I live in today, Sumas First Nation, and they've been generous hosts in the past. And we're still there. So the vision, what do we want to do moving forward? And I had this crazy idea about a year ago about a Lower Fraser, and I didn't know what we were going to call it, and it became the Center for Cooperation and Collaboration. And I know that's not going to be the name. I think it'll probably have a Hulkamalum or a Hunkaminum name at some point, but it's something to gravitate towards for now. And so we contracted a building designer, and the mentality is we build it, maybe everybody will show up. So that's the idea behind this. And to the right on this building, we've got enough room for residents, whether they be staff or people looking for accommodations if they're going to come visit the center for a few days. In the middle is all of our central operations and management offices, and to the left is the bio team with all of their laboratories and boats and things that they need. And this is the building. And I'm going to bring it to life right here, and then I'll talk a little more about it after that. Okay, so I can't proclaim to know all of our history and culture, but I can share some of what I've heard and learned. In the past, we had large longhouses, some that were 600 feet long or more, to accommodate our families and other tribes for several days at a time. They were used for ceremonies, celebrations, and often to resolve issues between tribes and families. Some territory or resource debate took hours, sometimes weeks, to resolve, but the general principle was no one left until the problems were resolved in totality. There was no such thing as putting problems in the parking lot to be resolved at a later date. 7th-generation thinking allowed for short and long-term plans to be understood amongst families and tribes. Ceremony was conducted, witnesses were called, and they were tasked with remembering all of the events in detail and then passing that down from generation to generation. We lived within a matrilineal society where the matriarchs guided all activities of the village. Children were recognized for their skills at an early age and trained to hunt, gather, fish, or be warriors. All of these responsibilities were equally important contributions to ensure the tribe could endure severe winter conditions. The workload was shared so that no one individual or family had to carry the majority of the load or authority. This maintained a balance and feeling of societal equity. In our Halkomelem language, Letsamot is interpreted as one heart, one mind, and recognizes that everything in life is connected. Plants, animals, water, and land were respected and treated as living beings. Having many resources to sustain the people demonstrated a richness in our society, but the real richness was demonstrated by giving and sharing with other tribes and families. Today, this is often practiced after our ceremonies in the form of giveaways, which are intended to sustain people on their journey home. This was land and is the Longhouse life and is the vision of the Lower Fraser Center for Collaboration and Cooperation. And we'll need many Salmon warriors to make this happen. But just by show of hands, who wants to come to the Longhouse? Right on. Awesome. So we have our work cut out for us. Even if we can build this massive building, have a place for ourselves, have a place for government, NGOs, industry, anybody that wants to do good things for salmon. So our next steps is really reviewing this further with our leadership and getting to a place where we can develop and ratify a governance model that works for the nations. And then we're going to be coming to people like you, government, and saying, this is the way we want to do it. This is the way it's been done for millennia, and we want to bring that forward. Of course, engaging our stakeholders. This is not a fully baked item. We're going to be engaging stakeholders and anybody that wants to contribute and seek partnership and champions along the way. Of course, this is going to be a massive undertaking in terms of funding. It's $40 to $50 million for this building. It's fairly, I would say, modest in nature. And we haven't figured out property location yet, but we're thinking definitely near the water. And, well, we'll figure it out. And one of the nations will have a good idea, I'm sure. And execute by 2030. So if we don't put a date on this, it'll never happen. 2030 is pretty damn close, isn't it? So short 5 years away. But I plan on retiring at least maybe 5 or 6 years, so it'd be a great legacy to consider. And really, the Nike approach, you just got to do it, and that's the only way forward. So thank you for listening. I appreciate the Salmon Foundation and the Fisheries Council for allowing time on your agenda, and I look forward to seeing Salmon Warriors regularly. Aichka Siam.